In Italian military history, names like Custozza, Adua, or Caporetto are synonyms for great defeats. Another event of lesser impact, but certainly quite famous, is the Naval Battle of Lissa, an episode of the Third Italian War of Independence, fought in the context of the Austro-Prussian War. I will analyze the run-up to the battle, the clash itself, and its consequences. It's not in the scope of this channel to analyze the events of the Third Italian War of Independence. Therefore, I will limit myself to recalling that, in such conflict, Italy had sided with Prussia against Austria, honoring an alliance pact signed months earlier. Diplomatic machinations had been underway for long. Now it was time to ready men and arms. Italy secretly started the general mobilization, which also involved the navy, the Regia Marina. On the 28th of April, 7 classes of conscripts were mobilized, while the other 4 were already in service. The navy personnel increased from 10,000 men to 17,000 men. To not alarm the Austrians ahead of time, the rearmament of the available ships proceeded slowly, causing delays that would later create troubles during the Adriatic campaign. On the 3rd of May, a royal decree assigned the supreme command of the Naval Armada to Admiral Carlo Pellion di Persano. The ships should have concentrated in Taranto and later moved to Ancona. Persano assumed his command at Taranto on the 16th of May. According to the royal decree, the Armada was divided into 3 squadrons. The battle squadron under Persano himself. It included the armored frigates Re d'Italia, Re di Portogallo, San Martino, Ancona, Maria Pia, Castelfidardo, and the armored ram Affondatore. The siege squadron, under Rear Admiral Vacca, included the frigate Principe di Carignano, the corvettes Terribile and Formidabile, and the gunboats Palestro and Varese. All these ships were also armored. The subsidiary squadron under Vice Admiral Albini included 11 wooden frigates and corvettes, with no armor. The naval armada was numerous, but very heterogeneous. For example, ironclad warships included faster frigates alongside slower gunboats. This significantly limited some kinds of operations, as we will see later. The ships also presented an insufficient state of readiness. Some still had to embark on part of the artillery, while others lacked skilled engine mechanics. These shortcomings, coupled with the lack of sufficient training, were caused by the limited budgets of the previous years. On top of this, there was the legacy of an imperfect merge of the pre-unification navies, which left many frictions, especially among higher officers. This was the cause of concern for the Minister of the Navy, Angioletti, explicated in a letter sent to Admiral Persano before the war. After World War II, Admiral Iachino wrote a fundamental work on the Naval Campaign of Lissa. Referring to this situation, he wrote, "How the officers from the different navies had been merged into the Regia Marina prevented the formation of homogeneous ranks and roles, and kept personal contrasts alive, so much so that in 1866 a serene brotherhood in arms was still missing. This would have been so useful for transforming a group of hastily armed ships into a truly solid fleet, animated by a united fighting spirit." Another major problem was the absence of sufficiently large dry docks in the theater of operations. Furthermore, the fleet found itself operating from very limited ports and bases, such as Taranto, Brindisi and Ancona, greatly aggravating several logistical aspects, including the resupply of coal. A few words now on the man called to lead the fleet. Admiral Carlo Pellion di Persano had been recalled in active duty because he was the highest ranking officer in the Navy. This happened many years after his last command at sea, and moreover when he was already old, at least by the standards of the time. Given his background, one certainly could not question his skills as a naval commander or his courage. Surely he lacked the stamina enjoyed by his future and younger opponent. The two subordinate admirals, Albini and Vacca, the former from Piedmont and the latter from Naples, hated each other and in turn hated Admiral Persano. From this overview, one can easily observe that the Regia Marina was not in the best position to wage a war against Austria. The war between Italy and Austria broke out on the 20th of June, and the Italian army soon started to advance into enemy territory. The defeat of Custozza on the 24th and the uncertain actions of the army leadership soon drove the Italian forces and the country itself in a difficult position. Meanwhile, the naval armada arrived in Ancona on the 25th of June, with crews and armaments still incomplete. In addition, the armored ram Affondatore was still in Naples for the last fitting out works, following her arrival from British shipyards. On the 27th of June, the Austrian fleet left the base of Pola in force and headed for Ancona to get accurate intelligence on the actual Italian naval presence. The scout Esploratore brought word of the approaching enemy. The Italian squadron, still in the resupply phase, left the port to line up in front of the enemy. During these phases, Persano boarded the scout Messaggero and got close to several warships to directly understand the status of each vessel. Several ships had incomplete armament, suffered from breakdowns, or had to complete the embarkation of food and supplies. Despite this unhappy situation, Persano managed in a short time to deploy the armada and head for the Austrians. Facing a larger enemy fleet, Admiral Tegethoff, unaware of the state of the Italian ships, decided to withdraw. Persano, in turn, did not pursue the Austrians. The decision was made on the awareness that his ships were not ready, as he had just acknowledged. In addition, the different speeds that various ships could reach would have made it difficult to pursue at sustained speed the enemy, while maintaining a close formation. Persano's choice was harshly criticized by his subordinates and created further resentment that later poured towards the admiral after Lissa. The Prussian victory at Sadova on the 3rd of July led to the first Austrian attempts to seek peace. This prompted the Italian military and political leadership to try and obtain a quick victory, improving the Italian position at the peace table. On the 14th of July, the Supreme Command ordered Admiral Persano to take action against the enemy fortress and fleet, as soon as the Affondatore had arrived in Ancona, or face his dismissal. The Affondatore, still not available, was eagerly awaited by Persano, and he had often referred to the ship as an essential element for starting offensive operations. The following day, the new Minister of the Navy, De Pretis, went to Ancona, further asking Persano to take action. The admiral was tasked with saving the face of the government and of the country. Following exchanges of views between De Pretis, Admiral Vacca and Commander D'Amico, Persano's chief of staff, the idea of occupying the island of Lissa got momentum, and this was the only operation conceivable in the short term, given the imminent end of the war. Persano said he was willing to implement the minister's idea, but also reiterated that 5,000 or 6,000 men, commanded by an army general, were needed, while only 1,000–1,500 marines could be gathered at the moment. After further discussion, Persano put aside his reserves and kick-started the operation against Lissa in the early afternoon of the 16th of July. Commenting on those events, Iachino wrote, "Unfortunately, Persano lacked a clear vision of the dangers he was running into. He carried out, without conviction, the operation that De Pretis pressed for, but for which the minister himself did not intend to assume responsibility." In those days, Persano was morally weakened following the continuous disagreements he had with everyone, the harsh treatment received from De Pretis and the general headquarters. Instead of resisting to the ill-conceived operation, he accepted the task. On the 18th of July, after a day and a half of navigation, the Italian fleet arrived in front of Lissa, and the attack began. Rear Admiral Vacca began the bombardment of Porto Comisa. Vice Admiral Albini headed towards Porto Manego, while Persano, with the bulk of the ironclad warships, headed towards Porto San Giorgio. The expeditionary force transported by Albini's ships should have landed near Porto Manego, an area considered to be less defended. These arrangements were made following a reconnaissance mission around the island carried out on the 17th of July by Captain D'Amico aboard the scout Messaggero, that raised the British flag for the occasion, attempting to deceive the Austrians. However, they did not take the bait. The bombardments of the 18th did not silence the coastal batteries in the areas of Comisa and Manego. This was largely due to the fact that the Austrian positions were placed high above the sea, thus reducing the fire effectiveness. In the evening, Albini and Vacca regrouped with Persano in front of Porto San Giorgio, where instead the attacks had caused greater damage. Given this situation, the landings were postponed, awaiting for the likely arrival of the Austrian fleet on the next day. However, Tegethoff did not show up, and during the afternoon of the 19th, the bombardment of Porto San Giorgio resumed. On that day, the most notable event was the duel between the corvette Formidabile and the Madonna battery. The Italian ship under the command of Captain Sembon could not maneuver much in the narrow inlet, and therefore dropped the anchor to maneuver around it, showing one or the other side at the time and firing on the Madonna battery at about 400 meters. After a long and bloody duel, with the short-lived intervention of other 3 warships, the Italian ships left the inlet at dusk. On the morning of the 20th of July, the landing of the expeditionary force was meant to take place from 7 am in the area of Porto Carober. The operations took a little longer, and when lifeboats packed with the landing force were about to depart, the scout Esploratore appeared on the horizon at 7:50 am. The vessel, which was on lookout duty in the area northwest of Lissa, raised the signal, "Suspicious vessel approaching." Tegethoff was arriving, and Persano ordered the fleet to halt the landings and turn in the direction of the enemy. Here Persano made a first mistake. He headed too hastily toward the enemy, before gathering all his forces. 2 battleships, Varese and Terribile, were in the area of Porto Comisa, while Albini was still delayed in recovering the forces destined to the landings. The 8 remaining Italian warships proceeded in a west-southwest direction, when they sighted the Austrian squadron at around 9:30. Half an hour later, Persano ordered the formation to turn north-northwest, assuming a line formation, with the intention of cutting off Tegethoff's course. Also, this decision is perhaps a bit questionable, as it led the Italian squadron right on the enemy's route, facilitating their subsequent maneuvers. At this stage, with the Austrians still quite far away, Persano followed up on his long-announced decision to move his command from the Re d'Italia to the Affondatore. This operation, which lasted about 10 minutes, created a gap of around 1,500 meters between the ships under the command of Vacca and the rest of the fleet. Tegethoff decided to take advantage of it, ordering to assume a line formation to slip through the gap. Meanwhile, the wooden ships under Albini were still further back to the south, and the Vice-Admiral did not seem inclined to close the distance with the Austrians. Tegethoff managed to divide the Italian squadron into 2 sections, the ships under Vacca to the north and those under Persano. He put his ironclad warships at the front while the wooden ships followed in the rear. At this point, at around 10:30 am, the actual fight began, and it will develop into 2 areas that we will see in a while. Once he crossed the Italian line, Tegethoff, who feared the risk of being cut off, ordered his ironclad ships to turn left. This brought his formation closer to the Italian ironclads Re d'Italia, Palestro and San Martino. As consequence, a series of ramming attempts and furious exchanges of gunfire took place. Vacca's ships, in a more advanced position, began a slow turn southwest that did not allow him to effectively take part in the clash. A little further south, the group of Italian ironclads under Ribotti, supported by the Affondatore, engaged a furious fight with the Austrian wooden ships. A notable action was fought between the ship of the line Kaiser and the Re di Portogallo. The Austrian vessel rammed the Italian ironclad, but dealt little damage and lost the figurehead on the deck of the enemy ship. The Italians returned fire, inflicting more damage before the Kaiser could break free. Meanwhile, further north, amid the smoke and confusion, Tegetov's flagship sighted the Red Italia, dead in the water. The vessel had received a hit that disabled the rudder. Commander Emilio Fa di Bruno ordered the engine to stop, probably to avoid a collision. The Ferdinand Max then rammed the Red Italia, which soon sank with most of the crew, who continued to fire muskets and cannons at the Austrians, while sinking. In the meantime, the gunboat Palestro had left the battle area, while trying to extinguish a fire that erupted on board. After the sinking of the Red Italia, Ribotti's ships regrouped with the Affondatore and with Vacca's division, while Albini's wooden ships arrived from the south, together with the armored corvette Terribile. Tegetov's ironclads were distant and separated from the wooden ships, battered by the clash with the Italian formation. At this point, Persano signaled to resume the battle, aiming for the wooden enemy ships that were closer to him. However, Persano's orders were not followed, with the exception of the Re di Portogallo. Vacca and Albini incredibly did not respond. Vacca subsequently even declared that he did not consider the order of the Supreme Commander appropriate. This behavior, very serious from a military perspective, was the reason why the fight did not resume in the afternoon. Shortly before 3 p.m., the gunboat Palestro blew up due to the fire that the valiant crew, led by Captain Cappellini, had not been able to extinguish. The fleet resumed its course for Ancona, while the Affondatore, Principe Umberto and the Governolo stayed back to recover the survivors from the Red Italia. The Austrians in turn reached Porto San Giorgio and dropped their anchors. The Battle of Lissa was over. After the return to Ancona, Persano was dismissed by the government, facing a trial in 1867, where he was judged by fellow senators that lacked any qualification or skills to evaluate naval operations. They found the admiral guilty, and subsequently Persano lost his rank and the associated pension. The government had therefore found a convenient scapegoat, satisfying those who disliked him, including his subordinate officers. There are some myths about the events of Lissa that persist today. Some are exemplified by the widespread statement that Lissa was the last victory of the Republic of Venice, hinting at the supposed fact that the majority of Tegetov's men were from Venice or the areas nearby. Thanks to the work of Andrea Tirondola, exposed in an article that appeared in Rivista Marittima, the magazine of the Italian Navy, in April 2021, we can debunk the main myths surrounding the facts narrated. The presence of Venetian and ethnic Italian sailors at Lissa is undoubted. However, it is proven that these men numbered no more than 600 out of the approximately 8,000 sailors commanded by Tegetov. After the Revolution of 1848, the Austrian Navy proceeded with the real work of de-Venetization and de-Italianization of its ranks. This was also because several officers and men had deserted, joining the revolutionary cause. Officers of Venetian or Italian origin dropped from 60 to 12% in a few years, while German became the only language on board ships from 1850. Furthermore, shouts, songs, symbols, or anything else that praised or referred to the revolution of 1848 were forbidden. Several testimonies report that the Venetians present on the Austrian ships expressed feelings of closeness with their countrymen on the other side. Many extremely motivated Venetians were instead present in the Italian fleet and were eager to beat the enemy who was occupying and exploiting their land at the time. They clearly remembered the events of 1848, the Austrian repression and the bombardment of Venice. As written by Tirondola in the aforementioned article, if on the 20th of July 1866 there were men who fought in the name of Venice and San Marco, These were undoubtedly those who had previously lost everything to fight against Austria. At last, they saw the opportunity, under the Italian flag, to fight the long-awaited clash with their ancient enemy. It is worth remembering them, like the young ensign Giustino Ivancic from Istria, killed by a musket shot on the deck of the Red Italia. Another myth is linked to the alleged quote from Tegethoff, "Iron men on wooden ships defeated wooden men on iron ships." The truth is that Tegethoff wrote a different sentence in a report following the battle. For a fight with armored ships at short distances, however, Farragut's motto, "Wooden ships, iron hearts," was the rule. He was referring to a motto attributed to the Admiral David Farragut and originating in the American Civil War. In celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Battle of Lissa, the Viennese newspaper Neue Freie Presse manipulated Tegethoff's word and added the second part of the sentence, referring to the Italians. The article was subsequently reported by the Italian press, without many checks, giving rise to another legend. Lastly, the upstanding behavior held by Admiral Persano during the trial and in the years that followed deserves to be remembered. His actions during the campaign certainly proved that he was not a coward and accepted the fight. Later, he never accused his subordinate commanders, although they had large responsibilities, and always took full responsibility for the defeat. He protested against the unfair decision of depriving him of his pension, thus erasing more than 36 years of service rendered to the state. Persano wrote to the king asking for the reinstatement of the pension, but the latter instead offered him a large sum of money. Persano disdainfully refused. He wrote in a letter that he was asking for justice, not for money. The admiral lived the rest of his life amid hardships and family dramas, finally dying in 1883. Lissa was certainly not a shiny page for the still young Italian navy, and a big opportunity for victory was certainly lost. We have seen that there were multiple causes and choices behind the failure. However, one should also not exaggerate the impact of the battle. The war was won elsewhere by the Prussian army, and the occupation of Lissa would not have changed much. From a sea power perspective, the defeat did not change the strategic situation of the Adriatic and did not interrupt the process of development and expansion of the Italian navy. In the years to come, this development was pushed by great personalities such as Augusto Ribotti, Simone Pacore de Saint-Bon, and Benedetto Brin. The navy grew steadily, arriving in good shape on the eve of the First World War, in which the Regia Marina managed to avenge Lissa. I hope you have enjoyed this video and let me know what you think in the comments. As always, the sources, although all in Italian, are in the description. Good luck and fair seas!